for Windows 10, but for generally for backing up everything in a computer. So while up until now it's been definitely Windows 10, this applies to Mac users, Linux users, Android users, the whole 9 yards. Used to be you could do a backup to disk, a backup to tape, or a backup to hard disk, hard drive, including banging in a portable hard drive or a hard drive on a caddy. And again, back in the bad old days, when I was working for a living, you could do a full backup whereby you simply took your disk and backed everything up. You could do an incremental backup whereby you took the full backup on the Sunday, and on the Monday you backed up Monday's stuff, and on the Tuesday you backed up Monday's stuff and Tuesday's stuff, and on the Wednesday you backed up Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesday's stuff all the way through until Sunday when you backed up the whole lot again. Or you could do a differential backup. Differential backup is where you do the full backup on the Sunday. On Monday, you back up Monday's stuff. On Tuesday, you back up Tuesday's stuff. On Wednesday, you back up Wednesday's stuff. And if it comes time to restore it, you put in the full backup, and then you restore the Monday, then you restore the Tuesday, then you restore the Wednesday back to where you are. And so it's a longer restore, but it's a quicker backup. But none of that really happens anymore. Nobody does that anymore for a reason that I'll explain in a second. And while I'm at it, I kind of want to talk about backup poisoning, which doesn't get mentioned very much, but is a real thing. And don't ask me how I know about this, but I know about this. If I was a naughty person with a black hat and I wanted to hold your company to ransom with one of these ransomware attacks, right, or do whatever it is nefarious that I want to do, and I get into your company through a phishing attack or through somebody taking a pen drive in or whatever, and I've got access, then the first thing that I would do would be doing nothing for a month. Because that way, whoever's doing your backups all my stuff into the backup, and backs up all my stuff into the backup, and backs up all my stuff into the backup. And that way, a month, 6 weeks from now, when I say, right, I'm going to destroy all your stuff unless you pay me money, the first thing he'll do is restore the backup. But when he's restoring the backup, he's going to be restoring my crack that got me in as well, because I've poisoned these backups. So it's a thing you have to be really aware of, is if you're making backups, that they're clean backups, that they've not got anything on them in the way of malware or viruses or anything like that before you back anything up. A poisoned backup is actually worse than no backup at all. Nowadays, we've all got big disks, and it's not to do, getting a big disk to do a big backup isn't a problem, because big disks are cheap. You know, £100 buys you terabytes of space. The problem is the time to do backups. Formatting a terabyte takes you all night, takes you 24 hours sometimes, depending on the machine. Yeah. And then, as I say, there's the manual versus scripted thing. You can write a script, buy a script. A script is simply a set of instructions that the machine will do automatically, one after the other, to do your backups every day at a certain time or every night through the night. Or you can do it yourself, but not everybody has the discipline to do either of those. Now look at this. A terabyte is 1,000,000 megabytes. And we've all got terabyte drives nowadays. If you've bought a laptop or a computer in the past 4 or 5 years, it was a terabyte drive that was in it. And if you want to back that up, you're going to have to go and buy 754,000 floppy disks. Right? And that's not really a sensible option. Apart from the fact that you don't have room to store 754,000 floppy disks, you certainly don't have time to pop them all in one at a time and wait for the wee head going round about. And so backups have moved on. They've moved on significantly. Why would you want to back up your stuff? If you ask that, the first answer you get is, oh, in case of data loss, in case I lose something. Now, back in the bad old days, when you installed Windows, you had to install the Windows operating system itself, and then you had to install your mouse driver and your video card driver and your printer driver and all this other, your scanner driver, and all that happy bananas. And you had to put all this stuff in to make the operating system suit the hardware that it lived on. You don't have to do that anymore. Nowadays, you download Windows offline for nothing. It takes half an hour to download and half an hour to install, so you can forget about it. Similarly with the software, most of the software that you're using, you now download, or you can go and get it from disk or DVD, but for the most part, we just download it fresh. The only thing that you have to back up is your own data. So maybe that should be online and free to get as well. Just have a safe copy. If you've got a safe copy of your data that is up to date and available, that is all you need. You don't need any more to do a full backup. Because if the disk drive goes fut, you can have most of it together within an hour of getting a new disk and getting it installed. However, one other thing that I kind of want to talk about before we talk about how to actually do backups is security of backups. Your backup will contain sensitive data, secrets. Now that might be your own national insurance number, your CHI number, whatever. It could be information about your clients. Just the information that you have those people as clients is probably saleable to somebody. You might have patient data, student data, data that's entrusted to you because of your position, because of who you work for or who you are. Systems information, if I'm developing something, I've got stuff that's commercially sensitive because it's not a product that's out yet and I don't want anybody else seeing that. And all any information that you're saving or backup's just a means of saving stuff, and any saving that you're doing has to satisfy in the UK, the old Data Protection Act, nowadays in Europe, the GDPR, which is the European Data Protection Regulations. In order to do that, you can encrypt your stuff, but that's not always a good thing. You can encrypt each individual file, but that still lets me know the name of the file and what size it is, and there's stuff like that, so it's not necessarily helpful. You can encrypt a partition in your disk, you can encrypt the whole disk, or you can encrypt the whole system. Now, the whole system is maybe a bit of overkill. Lenovo, Dell, HP will sell you a laptop and you can set it up at the BIOS that if you don't enter a password, you can't actually start the machine. Mm-hmm. So there's options there as well. Encryption's a thing to talk about another day. I don't really need to go into the mechanics of that. What I do want to talk about is RAID, a redundant array of inexpensive or independent disks. Whether it's inexpensive or independent depends who you ask. Basically, there's a series of standards from RAID 0, which is I've got 2 disks and I just put 2 copies on, to RAID 6, which is I've got 9 disks and I put every byte, I put 1 bit on each of these 8 disks, and then I put a parity bit on the 9th disk so that I can recover it. Depending on the level of RAID that you use, you might, all the higher levels of RAID 4, 5, 6, for example, if you have a dead disk, if the disk goes bad, you don't even notice. A light comes on and you get an email saying you're going to have to change disk 4 on the stack. You take disk 4 out, throw it away and put another one in, and it gets on with it completely unknowns to you. There's no loss of information. Simple RAID 0 stuff you can do yourself by buying 2 disks, and I'll talk about that in a wee minute. But all that this does means that you've got a local safe copy of what you're doing. And the only thing that can then stop you from keeping your data then is a local fire. If the building's destroyed, then assume your computer's destroyed. And if it's a local safe copy in your office or in your room or in your building, then that goes as well. So in order to get past that, the only safe way of doing that is that an online copy that's away from your building. So how do we do it? We can have multiple devices in this PC. Talk about that in just a minute. You can have multiple drives on a backup server if you've got a backup server. Now, a backup server can be an old PC that you're not using anymore, and you slam a couple of disks into it and a little basic operating system, and it'll just run your backups for you. That would do. You can back up to a thumb drive if you have to, but please, if you do, don't come to me with it when it goes wrong, right? Because I will quote that on the 14th of August 2012, I warned you about this, right? When I worked in education, thumb drives came out and they were a great thing. Students started running about with them and staff were running about with them, and they were great things. But they also became the dog ate my homework. Because what would happen is all your stuff's due in on Friday and suddenly your thumb drive didn't. All my stuff was on that, sir. It was all written. I'd written it, I'd done the diagrams, everything was on there. It was perfect. It was a 10 out of 10 too. And now it's destroyed because my thumb drive's dead. And so I get the name because it happened occasionally to staff as well. And actually, if you've got a dead thumb drive, you can't recover them sometimes. And I did it. And it's really, really hard work. On a thumb drive, the information gets written over, rather than overwrite the previous copy or something, it writes it somewhere else so that all the memory space in the thumb drive gets used the same amount of times. It's called wear leveling, because a thumb drive will gradually break as it gets older and older. More and more bytes of it will die. And so this wear leveling algorithm will move your stuff all round about the thumb drive, and recovering it is a real pain because you have to work out the algorithm that Kingston or whoever it is that made the thumb drive have used to do the wear leveling trick. And it's really, really hard work. If you do get a thumb drive that's broken, the first thing I suggest you do is open it up and just gently sweat see the 4 connections from the USB to the electronics, because 5 times out of 6, that was what was wrong with the ones that I fixed, was simply the USB connection had come away from the board with a fine crack, and all you had to do was just give it a wee squeeze with a soldering iron and you could fix the thumb drive. So, rant over about thumb drives. A USB external drive is a spinning rust version or an SSD version of the thumb drive. It's a slightly bigger thing and it plugs into a USB socket in the front of your machine and you can copy your stuff off to that. The problem with a USB external drive, as I said earlier, is discipline. It's remembering to do it. It's like your layout. I'll do that. I'll get round to that eventually. I'll maybe back everything up at the weekend. I'll maybe back it up before the holidays. Or I'll just go on holiday. I'll maybe back it up when I get back. I'll maybe back it up at Christmas. And you never get round to it. And then, your disk drive stops and you've lost all your work. A network external drive, now that's another drive that's connected to, not to your machine, but onto your network. And that's another option. But again, there's a discipline, there's learning to do it. NAS is network attached storage, which is like a network external drive, but you can also get a RAID NAS, which we'll talk about. Let's have a look at some of these. There's an external hard drive. Terabyte for £43, right? That's the size of a 2.5-inch hard drive, and it's got a USB socket on it and it plugs in, and you can back up all your stuff onto that if you can learn the discipline to backing your stuff up onto an external hard drive. There's a network attached one. If you notice down at the bottom left there's a socket for plugging in a network cable, but also it's got wireless on it. So all that has to be is powered, and it's available in your network for you to save stuff to. And again, learn the discipline. There's a part of Windows 10 called the task scheduler that you can use to make things happen automatically. Once a day, once an hour, once a week, once a month. We'll maybe make that another one of these Sunday talks about how to use the task scheduler to enforce discipline in what you're doing. But you need the discipline if you're going to use either of these. Now this, I have one of these, And I think this is the dog's bits. It's 2 drives, each plugged in there. Now, mine are currently 2 6TB drives. So if I plug them in there, I've got 2 6TB drives, but I don't have a 12TB space. I've only got 6TB. But what happens is anything that I save to that device gets saved twice. Now, if one of those drives gets a bit, if the smart flag comes up in one of those drives and it thinks it's getting a bit old or it can't reach some of the sectors or it's starting to feel a bit unwell, I get an email from it saying drive 0 or drive 1 could be failing, time you looked at it. And what I do is I unplug the drive with the thing still running and I plug in another drive, and then quietly in the background the machine copies everything from the first drive to the second drive so that I've got 2 copies. They don't have to be identical drives. They don't have to be I can take a 6 out and pop in an 8 and it would copy from the 6 to the 8. And I could then take the other 6 out and put another 8 in and it would copy from the 8 to the 8. And I would have effectively updated all my copies from a 6TB to an 8TB drive. But I have to buy the drives twice because I need 2 drives in the box. But again, it's not an expensive solution if your information matters to you. Another company called Drobo make them. There's a Drobo. That one's got 5 bays in it. And again, you have to buy the discs. You buy the discs to suit what you're wanting to do. That attaches to your network. And on your network, it just appears as a drive. And you just save stuff to the drive. You're automatically saving it and saving its backup. Lastly, our old friend, the Raspberry Pi. There's a Raspberry Pi 4, Model 4B. That's a fairly recent one. 2 solid-state drives, and you just plug the solid-state drive into the USB connection of the Pi. You can get a wee program that will run on the Pi. The whole thing costs you less than £100. It's small, it's light, doesn't use any electricity. Again, a local, safe copy. If you want to just save with multiple disks on one machine, a modern motherboard will quite happily take 4 SATA drives. Some bigger laptops will include a second hard drive. You can turn the laptop over, open the cover, and there's space to put a second SATA drive in there. But nearly all modern laptops also have a caddy for a SATA optical drive, usually for a DVD or CD-ROM drive that plugs in the side, and they're all the same. If you go and look at them, the Dell one's the same as the Lenovo one, is the same as the HP one, is the same as the Asus one. They're all a standard thing because they're all made by the same company in China. So you can buy this fella for £4.98. That, you pop the optical drive out and put it somewhere safe, but you can then pop a 4TB drive in there, pop it back in instead of your optical drive. And instead of having a CD or a DVD that you hardly ever use, you've now got a proper big drive to keep stuff on so that you can then have 2 copies of things and you don't have to worry about losing stuff. £4.98, it's ridiculous. And none of these will work unless you use it. Backing stuff up manually, brilliant. That's simply deciding, I've just saved that copy, that thing that I'm going to give to Davey. I'm making a backup copy. That's a manual backup. Scripted backup is at 10 o'clock at night, the machine wakes up and takes everything in the My Documents file and copies it off to the backup drive. A positional backup is you've got a backup someplace else, not in your current machine. And backing up on the fly is that thing whereby you put it on the end drive, but the end drive's actually 2 disks and it makes 2 copies of it. Software. In Windows 10, there's a backup. If you go into the Windows 10 bottom left-hand channel and type backup, it will let you use the built-in backup tool, which is rubbish. And it will also restore Windows 7 data. If you've backed it up on Windows 7, you've now got a Windows 10 drive and you want to restore it, it'll do that, but it's clunky. There are lots and lots of bits of freeware and specialist software available to do it, but I tend not to use anything specialist. Inside Windows, there's the copy command. Copy source to destination, makes a copy. There's a thing called Xcopy, which means copy, including subdirectories and changing things as you go, and it's an extended copy and it's brilliant. But both copy and Xcopy, good as they are, have got this slight problem, in as much as if they hit a problem, if they can't find the file, or the file is damaged, or they haven't got space to put it, or they come across any kind of error, they stop. And the whole job stopped. So if I've got 10,000 files to back up and the seventh one has got an error, it's too big for a copy or something like that, then that's the copy stopped and that's the backup stopped, and I don't know about it unless I go back and look and I'm sitting there watching. Other than that, if I leave it unattended, I can lose information. There's this thing called Robocopy, which is a pun on Robocop, I think. But it's built into Windows. If you go to the Windows command line and type Robocopy, it will pop up. It comes as part of Windows. And what that does is it copies, and it just keeps copying, and it copies and copies and copies. Nothing stops it. If it's got an error, it tells you about the error, but it keeps copying in the background. Really, really useful thing. So I can tell it to copy C drive / users, just Robocopy C drive / users to F drive, and it will copy everything there. No matter if it's in use or a file something's got to open or whatever, doesn't matter. Robocopy will just do the whole lot. Really, really useful, really, really cheap. It's already built in, you've already got it. Now, rather than saving things locally on a drive in the house, how about saving things online? There's Google Drive. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to just go over it again in a minute. Amazon have a version. Microsoft have a version. It's coming. Microsoft Windows 11 is on its way out. There's all sorts of play with it versions available now. And included in that is Windows Teams built into the operating system, so you can't escape from it. This is Microsoft trying to steal Zoom's space, obviously. And built into the Teams thing that's coming in Windows 11 is a shared backup thing, whereby everything that you do with your team on Windows all gets backed up offline. That's going to cause multiple issues. I'm going to talk about issues in a minute as well. Dropbox, you know about. I've been sharing my Dropbox with everybody in the Merge group for years and years and years. If you've been to any of the meetings and I've put something up, or I do a presentation like this, then what I immediately do is stick it up in Dropbox. So if anybody wants it, they can have it. GitHub. Now, if you're saving programming material, if you're a developer and you're saving software, libraries, data, stuff like that, then GitHub is a really, really useful tool for that, for a team of people sharing access to a code base, for example. But they are not without their issues recently. They decided in the past month that it would be a good idea that they could make development work much, much quicker by applying AI techniques, whereby when you're connected to GitHub, if you start typing a line, it's read everybody else's code, and so it guesses what you're most likely to be doing. So when you type for x equals, it fills in the rest of the for loop for you. And if you start a new object, as soon as you name the object customer, it fills in customer name and address and customer ID and last contact and fills all that stuff in for you. However, it's stealing other people's information. It's stealing other people's intellectual property. And so there's a big stink now round about GitHub. And it could be that GitHub will be forced to close or reinvent themselves or whatever. So I would steer anybody away from GitHub just at the minute until the issues with the AI thing have resolved themselves. Mostly these things are free or very nearly free, and they give you a limited space. Google Drive is the one that I use. You download the Google Drive client to every phone, every PC, every grandpa box, every laptop that you've got. In each of those, it will create a space in the drive to hold your stuff. So on this machine, I've got a directory that holds all the stuff that is in Google Drive. That directory will be the same size as what I've got saved in Google Drive. So currently I've got about 15 or 20 gigabytes saved in Google Drive. So there's about 20 gigabytes of this machine is given over to that. 20 gigabytes of my laptop is also given over to it. 20 gigabytes of my other laptop is also given over to it. So that starts to eat a bit of space, particularly if you're saving a lot of stuff. And then this unobtrusive daemon that appears and continually monitors and updates. So what happens there is, if I save something to my Google Drive, then the daemon notices that I've saved it. And while I'm doing the next thing that I'm doing, it updates it to Google Drive, and Google Drive shares it with all my other devices. So I'm working in OpenSCAD and I save an STL file and I save that to Gdrive. And as it goes into Gdrive, it immediately gets uploaded to Google and gets shared to Gdrive on the machine upstairs and my laptop and all that stuff. So if I'm actually working in OpenSCAD, I will save files in this machine, walk upstairs to the 3D printer, knowing that by the time I get upstairs to the 3D printer, the stuff's there ready to print. And I don't have to actually put it on a disk and carry it or do all that good stuff. However, the unobtrusive daemon, when you switch your machine on, it checks your Google Drive and it has to check it against Google's version of what you've got. This machine's just come on. I've got to check the G drive. So it thrashes through the 20 gigabytes of data, looking to see what has changed and what's new timestamps on it. And then it upgrades, it goes up to Google and checks there what everything should be. So when you first switch the machine on, for about 10 minutes, this thing takes 90% of your computer's resources, doing this big check and then doing the hard check against Google. And that uses a lot of bandwidth, a lot of time. And the thing I notice is when I switch machines on, for the first 5 or 10 minutes, the fans are running because the processor's getting a kicking, doing all this hard work. So it's a thing you have to be aware of, particularly if it's not the most powerful computer in the world you're using, that this Google daemon can be a bit of a bugger. However, the other thing is this: if I don't put the Google daemon on the machine, then it doesn't do that, but I've still got access to my stuff because Google have been known to do a website or two. So what I can do is log into the Gdrive stuff on Google's copy of it via a web application and just download it. So on my phone, for example, I don't have any Gdrive client, but I can quite simply access stuff over the web. I just go to a web page and there's all my stuff. I've got to log in, obviously, so that I know I'm me, but I can, if I'm down at Davies and I want to show them something I've been working on, I can dial into my Gdrive from Davies' computer, download copies of what I'm using, access it, knowing that when I walk away from Davies' computer, I'm no longer logged into Gdrive. Let's have a wee look. There it's installed. It makes a directory called Google Drive or whatever you want to call it. You can put it on any drive you want. And there you are, I'm using 15 gigabytes of my 102 gigabytes. And 2 days ago, I made a new directory called drains and I put a couple of files up to it because I was sitting here using OpenSCAD to work on the drain thing. If I go to drive.google.com, there's all my stuff my backups basically that are with Google. I keep definitive versions of all my design work, all my electronics work, all that good stuff. I keep a version of all my settings so that if I start a new Arduino, for example, see that going and fetching all the libraries and going and installing all the that, to hell with that. I keep a copy of the settings for Arduino in there. Same with NPLab and JAL and all that stuff. I've kept versions of it in there, plus any files that I'm working on. And there, over there on Friday at 7 o'clock, I uploaded the shower filters, and it tells me what I'm doing. Up to 15 gigabytes of Google Drive, you can do this for nothing. 15 gigabytes is an awful lot if you're not saving anything but work. If you're saving the documents that you're making, 15 gigabytes is very often plenty. Above that, it costs you £15 plus VAT a year. And for me, £15 plus VAT a year is worth it. I pay it in November, December. They remind you a month ahead, your Google Drive update is due. You're either going to have to pay us £15 this time next month, or else you're going to have to get all your stuff off before we delete it. And it doesn't bother me. That's what I do. So there's a nice analogy when we're talking to people about backups, and it's to do with lots of eggs and lots of baskets, the food analogy. I'm sitting here now, and there's a glass of something wet and some Bombay mix that I'm liable to eat on the desk with me, close at hand. I've got fresh stuff in the fridge, so I could go and make a sandwich. I could go and have a bit of pizza or whatever with very little preparation, right? And that's very, very close at hand, but not at hand. And then there's the stuff in the freezer that's there, and if I want it, I'm going to have to put some time and effort into getting it out. But once, you know, if I need to get it out, I can do that. And that's kind of how you should think about your backups. You should have stuff that is close at hand in case you need it. So my own personal setup goes like this. I have an encrypted partition on the machine, second drive that holds a safety copy of everything that I'm doing. So on my machine, the actual C drive doesn't contain any information. It contains a copy of Windows, it contains some software, but you can get those anywhere. So if you steal my machine, you get a copy of Windows and you get a copy of OpenSCAD and you get a copy of MPLab. You don't get any of my information. It's on a drive that's been VeraCrypted. VeraCrypt I'll talk about in a minute. The NAS on the home network is N-Drive. So if I save something, I can save it to N-Drive. That's where I went today to get this presentation that I'm currently making. Right? I don't want that, all those presentations cluttering up all the machines, so I saved it in N-Drive. And today I just downloaded it to N-Drive. It took 4 seconds, and I'm now showing it off the desktop of this machine. And when I'm finished here, I'll delete it off the desktop, but it'll still be on the N-Drive. Yep, and that's where software, documents, movies, stuff like that. And then Google Drive is where I keep code snippets, documents that aren't necessarily live, but whatever. There's 12 terabytes, as I say, on that big NAS. There's 100 gigabytes on Google, and there's a terabyte here. Space is no longer an issue. Encryption, I use a thing called VeraCrypt. Free as ever. There used to be a thing called TrueCrypt, which looked exactly like that, identical to that, except for when it said when it says VeraCrypt, it used to say TrueCrypt. And what happened was the people that were making that suddenly announced, I'm sorry, we no longer trust this. They reckoned they had been infiltrated by somebody and they could no longer guarantee the safety of the encryption in TrueCrypt. So they stopped doing TrueCrypt. At which point a bunch of people, security professionals, took the code for TrueCrypt and analysed it line by line, byte by byte, found some bugs, fixed them, and released VeraCrypt, which is a verified version of TrueCrypt, again for nothing, guaranteed to give you encryption, very simple to use and cheap. You can Google it. There's my N-Drive. That's the big shared NAS, which lives on my network. Books, drivers, stuff to do with calculators, stuff to do with cameras, stuff to do with computers, documents, downloads, stuff to do with electronics, fonts. Who here's got a disk with 8,000 fonts on it that all take up a load of space? Fonts, games, graphics, movies, the stuff off of old pen drives. Who here has got a drive that's got the old drive stuff in it, and the old drive stuff in it's got the previous drive stuff in it, and it's got the previous drive stuff in it. I don't do any of that. I keep it all in the end drive, including random stuff that I haven't sorted out yet, all in the end drive. And then there's my Google Drive. You saw that earlier, but this time, if you look, this is a photograph of another PC, because this time I'm in C Drive, Google Drive, and it's called something different, the Google Drive directory in this machine, but it contains the same stuff as I showed earlier. So what you need depends on how much you need to protect, how often it changes, how often it grows, how likely it is to grow, and how available you need it to be. Do you want it available at a minute's notice, or do you want it available in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour? Oh, tomorrow will do. And how much time do you want to spend on it, and can you spend on it? You don't need to go and do this, you know, every time. If you have to go and spend an hour backing up every day, you've got an issue. And the way to analyze it for yourself is to work out what it would cost if you lost it. If the machine in front of you right now stopped dead, blue screen, would it be an irritation? Would you lose some work? Would you lose the company? I've reminded myself here to talk about SEPA. The Scottish Environmental Protection Agency were hit by a ransomware thing last year. The person that worked for SEPA thought they got away with it, so they reinstated the backups. Guess what had happened to the backups? They'd been poisoned, and so SEPA reckon it'll be a decade before they've got the information back that they lost. They had years and years and years of information about water tables and river heights and flood tables and runoff into rivers and from rivers and all that scientific information for decades, and it's all been lost because of one ransomware attack and some sort of bad backup strategy whereby they couldn't put it back into place. In the worst case, then you could lose life. So I'm not going to talk about that any further. Start with a plan. Are you going to do it locally? You're going to use RAID? You're going to not use RAID? You're going to use it online? You need to encrypt, not encrypt. Trial it. Make sure you test it. Don't test it with live data, because that way madness lies. And by testing it, I mean make a backup, destroy the original, and then restore from the backup. Yep. Extend your trial to live data. And once you've got live data running, test it regularly. Every time you change the hardware, you should test your backup and document it, write it up, put it in the book in case you go underneath a bus. Right? There'll be nothing worse than you've got all your stuff for your wife in case you are suddenly taken unwell or die, but she can't access it because it's in the backups and she doesn't know how to get to it. Right? Now, it might be your wife's not particularly computer literate, in which case print it out on a couple of sheets of paper and put it away with a paper copy of your will. People can get to it if they need it. And I'm done. Any questions or comments?